For this rendition of our hunting stories, I had a chat with a good friend of mine, Richard Biswell. Now, we talked about his 2022 archery deer. He got into the weeds on some other issues. Unfortunately, I had a malfunction with my phone. I'm recording these with my phone, and about halfway through the conversation, I lost a lot of the audio. And in fact, the last 15 minutes of it completely was lost. So, sorry, Richard. I apologize up front for losing some of that. It just means we'll have to get together again soon sometime and finish that conversation out. So here's his account of his deer this year. And as always, I'm your host, Derek DeBoer, and thanks for joining us. I need the country.
Right. He's down. So just to give some background, Richard, you're one of the guys that I lean on for information. Richard and I have been colleagues up until this last summer, and then you pursued a different career path, and so hope that's going well. But like during that period of time, I know I'd always catch you on a job site and pick your brain. I'd be like, hey, Richard, what do you think about this? Like, because you have some background in actually the professional aspect of hunting in the outdoors that I don't have. I'm excited to hear about your deer story. I know you tagged out fairly early in the archery season, so I'm super pumped on that, about that, and just anxious to hear your story from this fall so far.
Yeah, I haven't archery hunted in a few years, so this was a nice opportunity to get back out in the woods a little bit early here. Quite frankly, chomping at the bit to get something. Had the freezer empty, so took one pretty early, but got the chance to go out 3 or 4 times before I actually harvested a deer, and took the time to really look at a few things, but just couldn't pass up a good shot. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
We moved up here to this house. And so that fall, didn't have too much time to spend shooting the bow, and then just kind of the last few years in the fall, haven't had the time to get out and shoot every day. So that was one of my goals since I changed jobs. Having the time off I did, I was like, man, I really want to get back into archery.
So what's your rotation now? I know your hours are different than kind of like a traditional 9 to 5, which is nice, I think.
Sure. So I went from doing landscaping with Derek here to I am a firefighter now, and I work for the federal government as a federal firefighter. So I have basically a shift of 2 days on, 2 days off. And so that gives me a lot of time to practice with the bow, go hunting, fishing. My wife and I, we've got a little golden retriever. He just turned a year, so I guess he's not little anymore, 80 pounds. So, but spend a lot of time with him. Would hopefully like to get him, out hunting here in the future sometime. He's really good at being outside. He's interested in some of that. So that'd be super cool to get him. I kind of toy with the idea of, seeing if he'd point something. I mean, he's got the retrieving down. I mean, that's in his blood. But
yeah, you're kind of pointing him in the direction of being a bird dog. Yeah, that's really cool. And that's something I have no background in. We've had multiple dogs in the past, and some of them, in fact, the current dog has the capabilities of doing some of that. But I don't have any kind of background in giving him a direction. So that'll be cool to see old Chip mature and see what he can do.
Yeah, we'll try to figure something out. Yeah. He likes to retrieve doves, so that's a start.
We'll get off on the doves maybe later. I have some questions there. But so you mentioned you'd gone out like 3 or 4 times before you tagged your buck.
Yep.
I would say that's pretty good odds for having him not hit the woods with a bow for a while and going out a handful of times. Were you hunting from a tree stand, or do you do ground hunting? Or
so what I like to do is I've always hunted on the ground. Started off, my family, we really did traditional black powder for a long time. I hadn't harvested a deer with a rifle until I was in high school and bought a rifle. Other than a muzzleloader. I mean, it's a rifled muzzleloader, but it was, traditional black powder, cap and ball kind of thing. So did that for a long time. And then in high school also got into archery hunting as well. But went several years without shooting a deer with my bow. I mean, just always, the opportunities didn't line up. It's just always kind of hard. Everybody who archery hunts, knows how difficult it is. And then I like to be a little bit more crazy and sit behind a tree on the ground and pick a spot. So I sit behind a tree or beside a tree, normally in my ghillie suit is what I do. And then try to play the wind and play the sun a little bit and pick a spot. I think the deer are going to come up. So I like to hunt travel corridors. So I know that kind of adds to my dry spells. I can get close, but not necessarily have the best shot opportunity. And growing over time, I've definitely had to learn to pass the poor shot opportunities, and instead of wounding a deer, just watching it walk.
Right.
Just watching it walk by and then going, well, someday I'll get a nice broadside shot. So
yeah. I grew up tree stand hunting, and like that's how we learned, and that was my perspective on it. You set a tree stand and you go climb into it, and that's where you sit for the season. And I got to imagine that hunting from the ground actually gives you some flexibility, but also you're losing, that kind of bird's eye quote view of the lay of the land. So I suppose the shot opportunities can be a little different. I know I've tried a handful of times to hunt from the ground with a bow, and it's quite challenging. Where I feel like you have the advantage of moving around, when I get to the spot where I want to be, I'm like, well, this isn't going to work. So kudos to you for pulling it off, because that's something that's quite different. And of course, using the ghillie suit, that's got to work pretty well to your advantage too.
I find out that it really breaks up your outline, and especially your shoulders to your head. Like having that little bit of 3D and depth and camouflage there, I feel like, I don't want to say I can get away with more, but just watching the way the deer react looking at you and how your outline's broken up, it's just kind of like they know something's there, but since it's not smooth and they can't tell us like right away it's a person, they give you just a tiny bit little more leeway. So I've really enjoyed it. That's something I picked up when I worked on the King Ranch in South Texas. Is when we were guiding nilgai antelope hunts, we wore the little leafy commercial produced ghillie suits just to give us a split second more as we were walking through the woods. So those nilgai antelope would go, wow, is that a person or not?
Right.
And a lot of times that split second was the difference in making a shot or not. So
yeah. So are you in like a wooded setting, or like we have a lot of mixed like grassland with cedar trees, or just straight grassland? What's it like when or maybe a mix of all that? I don't know.
So we're pretty fortunate. I hunt up in Marshall County, Kansas, is where my family has some property at. And
we'll bleep that out.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But anyway, it's a good place to be. We've still got filter strips on our land, so we still have some 30 wide yard buffer strips we keep just for soil conservation, and then it's also some nice bird habitat. I mean, we tend to have a few coveys of quail just because it's some of the only habitat left for them.
Right.
So that's nice. The deer like to bed there. They really are comfortable moving out into the fields, especially early in the year with that being there. And I mean, even towards now after the crops are out, you'll find them hanging around in the trails on there before the sun completely goes down. And, a lot of times we'll set off back in those travel corridors because the deer will feel comfortable being in there and not out in the open. So that's what my family likes to do. We like to set up on travel corridors in between a bedding area and a food source. So it's pretty mixed between a little bit of grass like that, and then we've got a creek, and then a nice ridge with some wooded timber. So a lot of oaks, but then there's also a lot of cedar trees and hackberry trees and stuff in there.
Yeah,
but,
kind of a typical Kansas creek setting.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the big thing is like going in early season and scouting, seeing, like, for instance, I moved where I sat about 30 yards to the west this year just because we had some damaged trees from a windstorm last year in the fall, and the deer just moved. Like, the first couple times I was out, I was like, wow, they've moved 30 or 40 yards to the west.
We saw that this year too. Probably the same storm system took a lot of our trees down and closed some trails, and it's like the deer completely shifted their patterns. It was a whole different ball game for the most part this year, which was strange, but also kind of fun because then you try to figure it out again. You get in your old rut of getting in the same spot with mixed results. So now you gotta use your brain and instinct again to figure that out. Your buck, was it in October that you shot yours?
Yeah, so it was like the second week in October.
Nice. Yeah, so it was kind of maybe more the regular bed to feed pattern. Was it a morning or afternoon hunt?
It was a morning hunt. Yeah. And so he's just a little 1.5 year old buck, but I mean, I just really enjoy being close to deer. They're such cool animals. And he ended up coming up the trail right in front of me. The wind was still blowing in his face, and he came right up the trail. I mean, having good scent control and everything, something my dad and I have really tried, and I hate to use the word perfected, but I think
Right.
we've perfected over the years of, you know, even to the point of having your clothes you're going to wear as your outside layer, as you're having your coffee as you're driving up in the morning. Like, you have that in a sealed bag in the back of the truck. So you're just trying as minimal as possible to get those human smells somewhere where they can be. And I mean, I've had deer come from downwind of me before, come up to like this buck, come up to, 11 yards and stand broadside, but then not have a clue that you're there. And so that's what happened on this hunt. We had this little buck come up, and he came straight up at us, and I was able to get behind the tree and draw back, and I was like, okay, so that's half the battle. Popped around the corner, and he's looking straight at me, and I'm like, oh man, I've got to keep my bow held back now. And they do the little deal they do where their head bobs side to side, and I know at that point he sees something that he doesn't like, and I'm just going, wow, how long can I keep my bow held back? And he flicked his tail twice and took 2 steps broadside, stopped, looked back down the trail he came up, and that's when I clicked the release, and it just hit him dead center, and he went about 20 yards and fell right over.
So how far is he from you when you're shooting?
So it was 11 yards.
Yeah. So he's right in there, and that'll get your blood pumping. I don't care what kind of deer it is. If it's a doe, if it's a fawn, when they are that close, that's a lot of fun.
I've taken some bad shots before. I mean, I've wounded plenty of deer in my life, just learning and trying to get better. It's like, wow, when you're at full draw and then they give you an opportunity like that, it's like, okay, this is a sign to go ahead and take that shot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I admire you for that. And that is such a cool experience. What time, like you said, morning, is that like early morning, mid-morning? How long were you out there?
So this was probably, like 8:30 or so.
Okay.
I mean, it was pretty early. Normally I'll sit till 11 or 11:30.
Yeah. Because
we still get some deer movement, even kind of mid-morning like that. But a lot of times, about 10 o'clock, the deer really quit moving in our area.
Yeah.
I've sat all day before, and you will get some deer moving through midday, but it's just not the constant flow like it seems like you see there for the first couple hours.
Yeah, we find that maybe more toward November, maybe end of October when they got the scrapes going.
Yeah.
And you can maybe sit on one of those and a buck will break free and check those middle of the day. That was an instance this year where some of those scrape lines just disappeared because those trails were shut off with trees.
Yep.
And I don't know, I didn't pursue it as well as I should have as far as sitting all day when I had the time to, but I kind of felt like, well, I haven't had many of those midday opportunities, and especially without those scrapes right where I needed to be. They were on field edges, which they were hitting early in the morning and late in the evening.
Sure.
So just kind of skipped that, but well, congrats. That's awesome. I love to text my buddies, and then when they reply with a picture of a deer down, that's just icing on the cake.
And I get, like you were talking about my background. So my background, I have a degree in wildlife and outdoor enterprise management and a minor in business from Kansas State University, and was very fortunate to get to work on the King Ranch in South Texas as a part of my internship for that. And then I also helped manage a deer hunting ranch in Southwest Missouri for a while too. So got to learn from some really knowledgeable biologists and then some of the best hunting guides around. Like, that was super cool. So I really take things that I've learned from those guys and then just kind of make it my own. I mean, I've got to the point where I enjoy following your journey and your podcast and your YouTube videos, Derek. But I mean, I get to the point where, man, I just can't watch hunting shows or anything anymore. Like, it just gets a little commercialized and things like that.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm searching maybe for that perspective that you have, because I grew up hunting. We kind of tried to figure it out on our own. Dad enjoyed hunting, but it wasn't like a main part of what we did. We just fell in love with it, mostly because what was kind of pushed our way by those companies commercializing hunting and selling their product. So came in it from that perspective. You grew up hunting.
Yeah.
So how did your perspective change after those type of experiences working on those ranches? Did that influence the way you are now, or did you hold on to more of the heritage that you kind of learned from your family?
Well, for a while, I mean, for a few years there, I mean, I didn't deer hunt after I worked on some of the big ranches, because I was like, well, if I'm not going to see a huge buck, like, it's not even worth me going out.
Sure.
So, I mean, there for a few years, I'd go hunt with my dad and things, but like, I didn't necessarily, shoot a deer every year. And then I just got to the point where I'm like, I really enjoy cooking a deer steak, or I really enjoy making some deer summer sausage like I did this afternoon when I was home. And it's like, well, I don't need a big set of antlers to do that. And so, they talk about stages of the hunter, and, you start out by you're just wanting to tag out and bag out. And then, you're hunting a certain age class of deer, you're hunting a certain trophy class of deer or whatever. And then I think I've kind of gotten full circle kind of back to, I just like sitting outside, but I also really enjoy using the resource and, eating deer meat and sharing that with friends and family. So in some ways I'm back to the bagger tagger stage, but like with a little more enlightenment maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm searching for too, because like I said, growing up, it was a big buck, whatever you want to picture in your head when you think of a big buck. Back then, it still is really a trophy deer, whatever inches. I don't like talking in terms of inches because that ruins a lot of the fun.
Yeah.
But we passed a lot of deer, and kind of like you. Well, if we're not going to see a big deer, why are we even hunting? Well, then you get to the point where, well, shoot, I haven't shot a deer, or I haven't shot a deer in a long time. I just need to shoot something to kind of prove to myself that I can do it. Well, you get that under your belt, and then you start having a lot of fun. And even now, we're kind of trying to like break through that barrier. If like a trophy is all dependent on your personal experience about it, down to maybe even the day.
Yeah.
How you're feeling that day. Like Thanksgiving morning this year, I've had a really great season and a really bummer of a season, and I'll show you why here later on. I'm kind of embarrassed about the whole thing and bummed. But anyway, so I was still trying hard around Thanksgiving, and in fact, I'm still trying. But Thanksgiving morning, we had to go to Kansas City, and I told my wife, I said, well, I can hunt, I think, until 8 o'clock. If I get out of the stand at 8, I can make it home, and we can make it to lunch in Kansas City for Thanksgiving. And had a buck. I could hear him down in the cedar draw, and it sounded like he was with a doe. I was like, man, the one I'm after has been around here. That might be him. Long story short, heard him coming up out of the draw into the field. He hopped the fence just directly below where the tree stand used to be. I'm just right around the corner from it now. And I was clipped onto the bowstring, and he was a younger buck, but he was about to get it. And if it hadn't been needing to get to lunch on Thanksgiving morning, that deer probably would have got an arrow in him. But like that would have been a trophy to me because he got me so pumped up, and just the circumstances of the season. So I love hearing you say that, because I think a lot of guys do get caught up in that, and you don't have to prove it to anybody. You're having fun, making the most of any opportunity you have, and getting out there. The chances of getting out in the woods are really slim. I've been very fortunate the last couple of years, and I'm glad that your schedule's kind of opened up because you can play around out there a little more now maybe too. I've been very fortunate to spend quite a bit of time out there, but if you really think about all the obligations that we have and just how busy life is, every chance you get out there is a blessing.
Yes,
and to take advantage of that any way you can is awesome. So
even to the point where like 3 years ago now, I shot a little button buck with an AR that I had put together, and so that was the first AR I've ever put together.
Yeah.
And then kind of spurred on by seeing your videos that you were sharing with me at work and sharing on YouTube. I was like, well, I've got a little action cam. I'm gonna put that on the scope and see if I can maybe actually film harvesting a deer, because I've never ever been able to film actually taking a shot and getting an animal. So that little button buck came up at about 30 yards, and it was like, this is the first time for everything. And I got the camera on, and it was recording, and I lined everything up and squeezed the trigger, and everything just worked out. And so even for me, that little button buck, I know some people say it's bad to shoot a little button buck or whatever, but even that deer, I got to eat it and enjoy having the meat with my family, and then I've got that video of that whole experience, and that's just super cool. So even, every deer that I shoot, I regard as a trophy.
Exactly.
For whatever reason, whether it's spending time with my dad or my uncles or family and friends, anything like that, like everything that comes into, we're taking a life, and we're having an experience with others when we're doing all that. It's all kind of spiritual at the same time, and then there's just always so much meaning in all of it for me. So every time I go out and I'm able to connect with an animal, it's like, it's all a trophy experience for me.
Right. Well, and the ultimate end goal is we do eat the venison.
Yeah.
And so normally we rely on that. Like my brother's family, I rely on that to have a certain amount of venison in the freezer for the year to come. Last year, we split a steer with my folks, so we didn't rely on that. I didn't get a deer last year, but it didn't hurt us. Now this year, I'm actually feeling the pressure because that steer's almost gone.
Sure.
And I haven't tagged a deer. And what if I screw around, trying for one specific buck, and I get to the end of the season and now I haven't tagged a deer, and that does really affect you. But that is the ultimate end goal. And we grew up, and you still see people, and I appreciate people that do get excited, and we do get excited when we take that deer because that's what we are as hunters, I think, especially if you do regard it as a trophy. And I had somebody comment, you need to show more excitement about it. Well, I'm really in a mixed spot when I shoot a deer because like you said, I understand I just took a life. And I, just maybe from the filming aspect, and I'm not serious about that either, but I really do enjoy just watching the wildlife.
Yeah.
And I get myself caught up in I'd almost rather just watch this deer than shoot it. Sometimes that crosses my mind, but then, that's when I know I'm a hunter because that other little itch to reach for the bow creeps in there. So,
oh yeah,
there's all part of that, but it's kind of hard. It's I am jacked up about this and excited, but it's kind of hard to show all that emotion when the seriousness of it. You're not just out there target shooting, you're taking the life of an animal and a resource, a precious one to us. There's all part of that on it.
Well, and that's the thing in my conscience that gets me when I take a bad shot or when I wound an animal and can't find it. It's learning from those experiences and trying to get better in myself. And then also realizing that at the end of the day, they still have some choice.
Yeah.
When they're sitting there, if they hear the release go and they move, they still have some choice in the whole matter. I know bows are fast and everything,
right.
But
yeah. And it takes an incredible amount of luck to get yourself in the position of that animal to even take the shot in the beginning. That's part of my season's experience this year. I made a very bad choice, and as a result of that, a bad shot. And I've been pretty bummed about it. But fortunately, I have a good support group of people around me, and I think that's important to not get real down on yourself. That happens. I'm glad you admitted to it because in a number of years of doing it, everybody's going to make those kind of mistakes, and you want to take it serious enough, like you alluded to improve yourself, but don't let it ruin your passion.
Right.
And that's kind of tough though when you realize what you've done and then you got to move on. So that's all part of it though.
I know my dad always talks about, there's some of those times where I get beat up. A few years ago, I lobbed an arrow at a nice buck and hit him too high. He dropped a little bit and I hit him too high, and the arrow didn't go in very far, and the deer pulled it out, and we watched him go about 100 yards and then work a scrape and then work another scrape. And it was oh man, he's bleeding, and I hit him right in the shoulder blade, and I hit him too high and all that kind of deal. But we ended up getting pictures of that deer later on in the year, all healed up. He had a pretty wicked scar.
Yeah.
But he was all healed up, and like my dad says sometimes, well, that can happen. Sometimes you're going to get them, sometimes you're not, and then other times they're going to run out in front of a semi, drink right, and get smacked along the side of the highway. Yeah. So
there is
just like we're talking, you can't beat yourself up about it too much.
Well, and then you think about how the whole circle of life is. Okay, so if you don't take the life of that animal while you're hunting, if it does live to a happy old age, it's probably not going to meet a real happy end there
right.
either.
Yeah.
So there's the whole circle there. But yeah, that's kind of how it goes sometimes. We've tracked plenty of deer that we've, and not necessarily that you can do everything right, and like you said, an animal can react and turn it around in a hurry. So there's all part of that to it too. So, but yeah, well, congrats. I'm excited about that deer. I was so pumped when you texted that back to me. I think I was texting you around the time Darren and I were taking our vacation, and so to have that just starts your week off really good when you're going to go hunting and your buddies have already got some things down. That's a really good feeling.
Well, there you have it. I had to find a good stopping point for this episode. Sorry, Richard, to cut you short there. I do sincerely apologize. We'll get together again and finish this one out, but I really enjoyed having a quick chat with you.